It all started as nothing more than a rumor. A late-night dare passed between teenagers who had nothing better to do than test the limits of their own courage. You know the kind. The stories that seem harmless, ridiculous even, until you find yourself wondering, late at night, if there's any truth to them. That's how it was with the legend of the girl in the mirror. It wasn't written down anywhere official. You didn't find it in books or on the internet. You only ever heard it from someone who heard it from someone else, and always with the same breathless urgency, like they were trying to offload something too heavy to carry on their own. At my high school, it was a rite of passage. Freshmen would huddle together in bathrooms with the lights off, giggling and daring each other to speak the forbidden words. It had rules, very specific ones, and everyone recited them like gospel. You had to be alone. The lights had to be off. The time had to be exactly 12:01 a.m., not midnight, not 12:02. Just 1 minute into the next day, like stepping across an invisible boundary, and the mirror had to be full length, unbroken, no cracks. You stood in front of it, eyes on your own reflection, and asked the question, who are you really? That was the key. That question, they said, opened a door. Most people laughed it off. Even the ones who tried it came away with nothing more than a slightly elevated heart rate and a good story to tell. But every once in a while, someone would get quiet after. They'd stop making jokes. They'd change in small, strange ways. Maybe they'd flinch when passing mirrors. Maybe they'd stop coming to school altogether. And when you asked them about it, they'd shrug it off like it was nothing, like it never happened. But you could see something behind their eyes, something cracked, something scared. No one really followed up. You didn't want to look too closely. That's the thing about stories like these. They only live if you feed them, and we all fed this one in silence. I heard it for the first time from my best friend Kayla. We were in the girls' bathroom after school, hiding from the cold and boredom that came with waiting for rides that never arrived on time. She leaned in close, like she was about to share a secret, and told me the story in a low, serious voice. Her cousin's friend had done it, saw something, and now she wouldn't leave her house, kept all the mirrors covered with bed sheets, and refused to sleep without the lights on. I laughed, of course. I was 17, and full of that invincible arrogance you only have when you think nothing in the world can touch you. But Kayla didn't laugh. She just looked at me, her expression dark, and said, "It's real." I should have taken it more seriously. There was something in her voice that day, something that hinted she wasn't just repeating what she'd been told. Maybe she'd seen something too. Maybe that's why she never joined the others in the bathroom mirror games, never stuck around for sleepovers that involved scary stories. She knew better, but I didn't. I dismissed the warning as a scare tactic, something meant to give life to a boring afternoon. And so, I did what teenagers often do when told not to touch the fire. I reached for it. I wanted to see for myself. I wanted to believe that fear was just another illusion waiting to be shattered. But the story had already planted itself deep inside my mind. And sometimes, when enough people believe in something, it stops being just a story. It becomes a doorway, one that's all too easy to open. The ritual wasn't complicated, but it had to be followed exactly. That was the catch. Every step, every detail had to be perfect, or so the story claimed. Mess it up, even slightly, and nothing would happen. Or worse, something might go wrong. Something no one had ever talked about. The instructions were whispered from one person to another, like sacred knowledge, always the same, always with a certain hush in the voice, like the person telling it wasn't sure whether they were passing on a game or a curse. It began with the time. 12:01 a.m., not midnight, not 12:09 exactly. That was important. They said it had to be 1 minute past, the very edge of the day, when time folds over into something fragile and uncertain. It wasn't superstition, it was precision. That moment, they claimed, was when the veil between the real world and something else became paper thin. Not gone, just weakened enough to allow something to slip through. Next came the mirror, It had to be a full-length mirror. No cracks, no scratches, nothing distorted. It had to show all of you, head to toe, without interruption. They said broken mirrors were dangerous, not just because of the legend, but because of what they represented. Incomplete reflections, distorted truths. If your image was broken, what came through might be broken too. So, people would clean the glass, polish the frame, make sure nothing interrupted the ritual. Some even bought brand new mirrors just for the purpose. Not that most would admit it afterward. The room had to be pitch dark. No flickering candles. No dim light from your phone. No streetlights peeking through the curtains. Total suffocating darkness. The kind where you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. That was essential. The girl in the mirror, they said, only appeared when there was nothing else to see. When your senses were stripped down to almost nothing. When all you had left was the sound of your own breathing and the shape of your fear. And you had to be alone, completely, utterly alone. No one hiding in the closet. No friends waiting behind the door to jump out and scare you. The presence of anyone else was said to confuse her. Sometimes make her angry. Sometimes make her curious. It was always worse when she got curious. That's what the stories warned. So you locked the door. You checked it twice. You made sure no one could hear you. And then, when everything else was perfectly in place, you stood in front of the mirror. You couldn't sit. You couldn't turn away. You had to face yourself, even if you didn't like what you saw. Especially if you didn't like what you saw. They said she fed off that. Your insecurity, your guilt, your quiet regrets. She would sense it. Smile at it. Use it. That was the part that made the whole thing more terrifying than just a ghost story. This wasn't about summoning some spirit. It was about exposing yourself to something that already knew what was broken inside you. The last part was the question. Just one sentence. One key to unlock the door. You had to look into your own eyes and ask, who are you really? Not with sarcasm. Not like a joke. You had to mean it. You had to dig into the part of you that truly didn't know the answer and ask from there. The moment those words left your lips, if everything else had been done right, the room would change. The temperature would drop. The mirror might ripple as if made of water. And she would appear, not suddenly, not dramatically, just a soft shift. A moment where you blinked, and she didn't. A tilt of the head that wasn't yours. A smirk you didn't feel. That was the signal. She was there now, watching, waiting, not just a reflection anymore. At first, it was barely noticeable. The kind of thing you'd blame on lack of sleep or a wandering imagination. I'd look into the mirror and everything would seem normal. My face, my eyes, my posture. But then, after a few seconds, something would feel off. It wasn't anything obvious. It wasn't like she jumped out at me or made a sound. It was more like a hesitation in my own reflection. A pause that lasted just a moment too long. I'd turn my head slightly to the left, and the reflection would lag behind, just by a fraction of a second. Blink, and she wouldn't. Smile, and she'd frown. And then, just as quickly, everything would snap back to normal, like it had never happened. I told myself it was my mind playing tricks. I'd done the ritual, sure, but nothing dramatic had happened that night. No ghostly figures, no shattered glass, no terrifying whispers in the dark. Just that strange chill, that sharp sense of being watched by something that wore my face. Afterward, I'd gone to bed thinking nothing had really changed. But in the days that followed, the mirror began to feel more alive, not haunted exactly, just too aware. I started noticing small things. My reflection standing just a little too still when I was brushing my hair. A faint smirk appearing on its lips when I was sad. The way it would look at me, not through me, but at me with something that felt far too intelligent. Then came the voices, not out loud, not in a way that anyone else could hear. They were thoughts, but not mine. Whispers, suggestions, dark little comments that slipped into my mind when I was standing in front of the glass. I'd be brushing my teeth and hear a whisper that said, "They don't really love you." Or fixing my hair and hear, "You're not enough, you never were." It wasn't the voice itself that scared me. It was the fact that it knew what to say. It knew the exact words to make my stomach twist, to hit the parts of me that I kept hidden even from myself. And every time, my reflection would seem just a little more smug. Like she was waiting for something, feeding off the way I flinched, the way my eyes darted away. I stopped turning the lights off in the bathroom. I avoided mirrors at night. I started brushing my teeth in the kitchen, putting makeup on with my phone camera instead. But no matter how hard I tried to avoid her, I couldn't escape the feeling that she was still there, still watching, just behind the glass, waiting for her chance. What really got to me was how she started mimicking things I hadn't done. I'd walk past a mirror and see her standing with her hands clasped behind her back, even though mine were at my sides. Or she'd tilt her head and stare, her lips curled into a knowing smile, while mine remained still. Sometimes she would mouth words, slow, deliberate, silent things that I couldn't quite make out. And yet, I always felt what she was saying, like the meaning crawled directly into my chest, like she was peeling something open inside me. It got worse when I was alone. The mirror became magnetic. I'd feel a pull toward it, like she wanted me to come closer, like she had something to show me. And when I resisted, the pull would become a pressure, a weight behind my eyes, a whisper in my mind that grew louder with every passing day. She wasn't just a reflection anymore. She was something else, something that had learned how to mimic me, how to study me, how to become more and more real. And the more I saw her, the more I started to wonder which one of us was really on the outside. She started speaking to me in full sentences about a week after the ritual. Not just whispers or fleeting thoughts anymore, actual words, clearly mouthed through the glass. No sound, of course. Her lips would move, but the room would remain, dead silent. And yet, somehow, I understood her perfectly. I didn't know how. It was like her words bypassed my ears and slid directly into my thoughts. And what she said was always the same, just in different variations. "I can help you. Let me help you." At first, I ignored her. I was already terrified, already doubting my own sanity, and the last thing I wanted was to engage. But she was persistent. She would appear more often, sometimes in places where there shouldn't have even been a reflection. A dark window, a puddle of water, the side of a turned-off screen. I'd see her lips move in those moments too, always forming the same message. Let me help. She never looked angry or threatening. That's what made it worse. She looked calm, understanding. Her eyes were soft, her smile gentle, like someone genuinely offering comfort. It was almost maternal, almost kind. And that scared me more than any scream or threat ever could, because it made me start to question myself. What if she really did want to help? What if she was the only one who actually saw the pain I was in? She knew things too, things no one else could possibly know. Deep things, dark things. She'd mouth little comments like, "I know how much you miss her," or "It's not your fault." And every time she said something like that, I'd feel something crumble a little inside me, because I did miss her. And I did blame myself. My mum had died the year before, and I'd carried that grief around like a weight chained to my chest. I'd never talked about it with anyone. Not really. But the girl in the mirror knew. She knew, and she didn't judge me. She just watched, me with those gentle eyes, and offered her help again and again. Eventually, I answered her. I don't know why. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe I wanted someone to talk to. Or maybe the silence of pretending I was okay had finally gotten too loud to bear. So one night, I stood in front of the mirror and whispered, "How?" My voice trembled. I didn't even know if she could hear me. But she smiled wider, like she'd been waiting for that exact moment. She mouthed, "Let me speak longer. Let me stay." That was the deal, unspoken but clear. Let her talk more. Let her exist just a little more fully in my world. I didn't understand what that meant exactly, but I could feel the tension in the air shift the moment she said it. Like the rules were bending. Like something that had been locked away was suddenly being let in, and after that night, things did start to change. I'd catch her reflection not just mimicking me, but moving even when I was perfectly still. She'd gesture toward the mirror like she wanted me to come closer. Sometimes she'd hold up her hand, inviting me to press mine to the glass. And the longer I stood there, the more I felt different, lighter, almost. Like a fog lifting, like her presence really was making the pain easier to bear. But with that relief came something else. A sense of something unraveling, like a boundary was being slowly erased. She was becoming stronger, her voice was clearer, and I was starting to feel like I didn't entirely belong on this side of the mirror anymore. I started losing time. At first, it was just a few minutes here and there, nothing too alarming. I'd zone out in front of the mirror, then snap back to reality and realize 10, maybe 15 minutes had passed without me noticing. I blamed it on stress, on lack of sleep. It was easy to dismiss, but then the gaps started getting longer. I'd find myself standing in front of the mirror with no memory of walking there. I'd look at the clock and see that an hour had vanished, and I had no idea what I'd done with it. Worse than the lost time were the things that began to change without my knowledge. My phone would have text messages I didn't remember sending. Messages to people I hadn't spoken to in months, saying things I would never say. Things that were strange, almost threatening. When I'd ask them about it later, they'd say, I seemed different, colder. They said I sounded like someone else. My journal, something private, something only I ever touched, started having entries I didn't remember writing. The handwriting was similar, but not quite mine. Slightly sharper, more precise. The words were darker, the thoughts crueler, as if someone was peeling back my mind layer by layer and writing from the parts I kept buried. The mirror had stopped being just glass. It felt like a window now, or maybe even a doorway, and she was always there, waiting, watching. Her smile had grown wider, more confident. She no longer mouthed things. She spoke clearly, her voice now a low echo inside my head, as familiar, as my own. She didn't ask to help anymore. She gave instructions. She told me things to say, people to avoid, secrets to keep. And I listened. I don't know when it changed from a conversation to a command, but it did. There were moments I didn't feel like myself. I'd catch glimpses of my reflection and see her standing straighter, holding herself differently, her eyes gleaming with something I couldn't describe. I'd feel something shift behind my ribs, like my body wasn't completely mine anymore, like I was sharing it. I'd hear my own voice say things that didn't sound like me. I started avoiding other people, not because I didn't want to be around them, but because they started looking at me like I was a stranger. My best friend stopped texting. My dad started knocking before entering the room, his eyes full of quiet concern he never voiced. I began waking up with bruises I couldn't explain. Long, narrow marks on my arms, fingertips pressed into my skin like I'd been grabbed by someone strong. My fingernails, once bitten down to nothing, had grown long and sharp overnight. My clothes would be out of place in the morning. My hair would be braided, something I never did. My room, once a comfortable mess, started being unnaturally clean, arranged, too perfect, too symmetrical. One night I caught her reflection smiling after I turned away. I saw it in the corner of my eye, just for a second. I spun back around, and she was already back in position, mirroring me perfectly. But that moment, that smile, it confirmed what I had been fearing all along. She wasn't copying me anymore. She was acting on her own, doing things when I wasn't looking, living a life behind the glass that was beginning to leak into mine. I stopped recognizing myself in photos. My face looked slightly different. Not enough that anyone else noticed, but enough that I did. My eyes seemed darker, my smile a little too wide, too knowing. I could feel her inside me sometimes, whispering thoughts that felt natural, even though I knew they weren't mine. It was like two minds coexisting in one body, but only one of us could be in control at a time. The final shift happened slowly, like a shadow creeping across the floor, inch by inch, until the light was gone and I hadn't even noticed. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was subtle, deliberate, like she was waiting for me to let my guard down just enough to let her slip through, and I did. Not because I trusted her, I never fully did, but because I was tired of fighting her presence, tired of questioning what was real and what wasn't, tired of pretending that I was still in control of my own life. The moment I realized something was truly wrong was when I saw myself doing things I had no memory of, on video. I had a small camera in my room that I used for journaling and recording thoughts, and one night I decided to watch the footage from the night before. What I saw shook me to the core. Around 3 a.m., the version of me on the screen stood up, walked to the mirror, and just stood there for almost half an hour, motionless. Then I started speaking. Not to the camera, to the mirror. And not in whispers, but in a voice too calm, too steady, too alien to feel like my own. The words were in a language I couldn't understand, fluid and sharp, like glass breaking in slow motion. And then, without warning, she smiled directly at the camera, as if she knew I'd be watching later. That was the first time I felt afraid of myself. People around me started to comment on how much I'd changed. My voice, my posture, even the way I moved. They said it wasn't just emotional. Something about me seemed physically different. My skin looked paler, almost translucent under certain lighting. My eyes didn't track the same way. I started catching people staring at me, strangers on the street, holding their gaze too long like they saw something behind my face that didn't quite fit. Some crossed the street to avoid me. Others whispered to each other as I passed. My presence was becoming wrong somehow, and I could feel it. I stopped sleeping, not because I couldn't, but because I was terrified of what might happen if I did. Each time I dozed off, I'd wake up somewhere new, in another room, outside, once even standing in front of the bathroom mirror, my fingers pressed to the glass so hard they left faint smudges in the shape of a hand I didn't remember raising. I tried removing the mirror. I took it down, covered it with blankets, even tried breaking it once. But no matter what I did, it would always reappear. Sometimes in dreams, sometimes in reflections I wasn't supposed to see. Storefront windows, puddles, elevator doors. She was always there now, smiling, watching, waiting. And she didn't need the mirror anymore to speak to me. Her voice had grown louder, clearer, more confident. She would answer questions I hadn't asked out loud. She would hum songs I hadn't heard in years. Sometimes I'd feel my lips move to repeat her words without realizing it. I was becoming a vessel, an echo of someone else. I felt my emotions dulling, like my fear was no longer mine to feel. Anger came more easily, but it didn't feel rooted in anything. It would flare up and fade, leaving nothing behind. I started forgetting people's names, people I'd known my whole life. Their faces became unfamiliar, like photos left in the sun too long. And through it all, she grew more present, more real. There were times when I'd look into a mirror and see her standing where I should be, not mirroring me anymore, just standing there, looking out. And in those moments, I knew something irreversible had happened. The barrier between us wasn't just weak, it was gone.